5,000 bodies. I have a little ways to go.
Well, this was one of the great things about studying in China. You know, at the hospital where I studied in Chengdu, 5,000 patients a day came through that hospital. Now, only a small fraction of them were acupuncture patients, maybe 350. And those seen in 5 or 6 different acupuncture clinics. But still, that provides a steady throughput of clinical problems to solve. And like the development of any habits, that's what it takes. You got to do it again. But this also belongs right here at the outset of our endeavor, because a large part of what I hope and intend and will help you accomplish in terms of getting out of the Course will be related to touch. How do you effectively touch patients? And here again, there are several basic principles that we practice every day in Tai Chi that I see as being essential to answer the question of how do you touch correctly. An old saying in Tai Chi, attract to emptiness. Development of the empty hand. How to train and use the hands as vessels for information in order to know what's going on with your patient. To extend the metaphors that we were using earlier, how to not know in your hands so that you can use them in accordance with what Lao Tzu says is the best way.
Can you say that one more time? How to not know with your hands? Or something else?
Precisely.
That's interesting.
You know, the opening movements of the form are an exercise in how to move the hand without moving the hand. Right? We spend a great deal of time trying to articulate a bodily understanding of what it means to empty joints and what it means to move by means of transmitting not strength but chi. And for this purpose, that line from the classics that you repeated just now, Mackenzie, is key. First it's in the mind, then it's in the body. The chi follows the mind. The body follows the chi. Well, as we learn in the study and practice of Taiji, such things are the result of strenuous training and refinement. People can't naturally behave that way. Obviously, people have that potential, or they couldn't develop it. But in terms of skill, don't anticipate that it resides in the untrained hand. It is solely and only the result of strenuous training. This is what we call Gong Fu. Hard work. Hard work over a long period of time. And to cut to the quick of the hard work doing what? Learning to use your feet to move your hands. And if that sounds too abstract or esoteric, just think about pushing a car. If you need to push a car, you will never push with your hands. You will only push from your feet. You will get your whole body arranged in relationship to the load you have to bear in such a way that you can use the force generated from the feet and legs in order to move the hands. A rather similar accomplishment is what faces the Tuina practitioner if they want to learn to attract to emptiness. You must connect hand and foot. Professor Cheng wrote in his Song of Form and Function that in push hands, the hands are not necessary. The whole body is a hand, and the hand is not a hand. Well, this is language that's imitative of the language in Lao Tzu, the language of Wu Wei, of action through non-action. And it evokes that Taoist ideal of which we spoke before. Knowing through not knowing. I ask students now and then in class, what's the hardest part about Taiji? And my answer is always the same. Nothing. Who can do nothing? Lao Tzu asked the question in a different way. I forget which chapter. Maybe chapter 10, in which he raises the question, who can still the muddy water? You ever been in a stream? Have you ever tried to actually still muddy water? You're standing in the stream, and by getting to the place you're in, you've kicked up the stream bottom. All the silt and mud and whatever else is down there is now in solution, in flux in the water. Hence muddy water. What does it take to let it still? nothing. You have to do nothing. You notice in this situation instantly that do anything and the water returns to being muddy. Only by being still does the water clarify. This is what's difficult about Tai Chi. It's not hard to move, it's hard to be still. Don't take my word for it. Just try to be still. Another line from the classics. Seek stillness in motion. Well, these are the kinds of principles to which I refer when I talk about the application of the principles of Tai Chi to the practice of clinical medicine. So we have a whole big category, stillness. How do you use stillness in your practice?
Is that a question or? Or were you gonna?
Well, was that a question?
Well, it seems like integral to be able to be receptive to the information you're receiving, to have some amount of stillness to be able to listen.
Yeah, I agree. You know, the most important thing in your practice is you. You are the tool. You are the instrument. How will you behave in your practice? You will behave the way you have been taught to and that you have practiced up until now. If you want to behave differently, you must change. But the most likely ways you'll continue to behave are according to the habits that you cultivate in your practice. So by training in stillness, training to seek stillness in movement, that's how you arrive at the possession of stillness to use in your practice. You can't just decide one day to do that. You must practice, you must know what to practice. That's what the Tai Chi class is for. If you want to embody these ideas, what do you do? Well, it turns out that the generic answer is pretty easy to state. You hold the body upright. You hold the hand in this position we call beautiful lady's wrist. When you want to turn, you fold your hip joint. You turn from the waist. You only move by means of differentiation of fullness and emptiness. No strength, in other words. You know the Chinese word li, strength. All over in different schools of Taiji in China, they share a common understanding: use mind, not strength. Strength is Li. Strength is the use of the body in such a way that the muscles and tendons compress the bones. You know, when you exert your muscles, when you move the limbs using the skeletal muscles, this we call Li. The Taiji classics inform us that where there is Li, there is no Qi. That Qi does not flow through the limbs when the muscles are contracted. In order for the Qi to flow, the muscles must be released. So we have the concept of relax. Relax in Chinese is what? It's song. Song shows the pine tree and unbraided hair. Again, stabilize the body upright and loosen all the force against force relationships in which you have engaged the body. In other words, relax. What happens when you relax? Things sink. To understand the nature of these dynamics, just recall that the body is principally made up of water. About 70% of your body is water. Regardless of the fact that it's incorporated into your flesh, it is still water. And it still wants to behave in the only way that water behaves. Water only seeks the lowest places. Relax the body completely, and what will the water do? Sink. It will act just like water acts anywhere you put it. So how do you use that force? These are the kind of considerations that bring us round and round again to the recognition that we are in a realm of touch and feeling and paying attention to the way things feel. So the theoretical knowledge about the body in Chinese medicine developed originally from tactile examination of living people. In order to animate those theories, that is precisely the kind of information that you need to plug into them in order to come up with meaningful analysis of cases. So a good deal of what I look forward to being able to practice together is the tactile examination of bodies, both in the course of identifying points as well as identifying the particulars of individuals' conditions, which we understand precisely as individual conditions at particular points. Somewhere along the line of this course, you'll see a list of about 40 points, which I consider to be the sort of most commonly used acupuncture points. You know, you look in the textbooks and you find, there's 365 regular channel points and dozens of extraordinary points. And it presents a problem of learning acupuncture anatomy, which is enormously complicated. But after years in the clinic, I've come to reflect, of those hundreds of points, only a couple dozen turn out to be ones that get used over and over and over and over. So, together, when we examine that list in detail, the way we will go about that examination is with our hands on these points. And in general, we will cultivate a relationship with the whole subject, which is based upon this hands-on approach. Does that make sense? What time is it, Mackenzie?
1:23.
Oh, perfect. So, turning to our syllabus, is everybody clear on the meaning of Tai Chi, by the way?
Yin Yang.
The
Greatest
limit.
Yeah, Tai Chi is probably most fundamentally a term in cosmology. It's a term, it's a vocabulary term that's found in discussions of what are the origins of the universe. And the limit, G, is the demarcation between existence and non-existence. Tai Chi, meaning the extreme boundary, means to evoke a sense of exploration for the boundaries of existence, similar to the modern search for what came before the Big Bang, what lies out beyond the edge of the universe. If we live in an expanding universe, into what is the universe expanding? These are kinds of questions which are rather typical of human minds. I mean to say, we've been asking such questions for a very long time. And to approach such questions, the concept of Taiji emerges in Chinese thought and discourse. As you say, Mackenzie, it means yin-yang. What we call the yin-yang symbol in English is called the Taiji diagram in Chinese. A Taoist meditation manual of the Ming Dynasty includes a mention of the fact that there are 4 terms which all are names of the same thing, but are slightly different emphases. Taiji, yin-yang, qi, and Tao. These 4 things are names of whatever that thing is. These are its names. And as I said earlier, what they basically express is a very ancient understanding that everything is always in motion. And that the motion at its most fundamental dynamics consists of expansion and contraction, yang and yin. That in a putative or imaginary state, before the existence of such counterpoised opposite movements, there was only what's called in mythical or folkloric terms as yuan qi, original qi. Original qi has the yin and yang smashed into one thing. No differentiation between yin and yang. It's a state of being which has a correlate in modern astronomy, what are called neutron stars, are stars in which the mass is large enough to collapse the electrons into the protons, so that there are no more polarities within atomic structure. There's only neutron soup, neutral soup. This is the same kind of idea that the Chinese theorists intuited existed in the universe, a state of being in which the complementary opposites of yin and yang were collapsed into each other. In other words, existence proceeds from the differentiation of yin and yang. In one of the old Taiji songs, the beginning lines say, Taiji comes from Wuji and is the mother of yin and yang. Wu without, again, like Wu Wei. Taiji, the great limit, comes from Wuji. Wuji, nothingness, chaos. It's very similar in meaning to the ancient Greek idea that cosmos emerges from chaos. Chaos in Greek means emptiness. Cosmos means order. Order comes from emptiness. Taiji comes from Wuji and is the mother of yin and yang. You don't get more fundamental in Chinese theory. This is the roots. As I was saying in Taiji class the other day, all of this kind of material is derivative of that tradition of knowledge we call the I Ching, or the Book of Changes, the oldest of the old classical texts, the classic of change. Again, to indulge ourselves in a comparison of ancient Chinese and Western ideation. In the Abrahamic religions, we see a model of the universe which can be depicted as an arrow. There's an origin point, the creator. There's an act. It moves in a direction. Creation flows from the creator to the created. It's what Alan Watts called the ceramic model of the universe. That as a potter makes a pot, as a carpenter builds a house, so did the Creator create the universe. And we, inhabitants of the universe, are the Creator's creations. No such delineation exists in the ancient Chinese model. Rather, at its core, you have a cycle. A fact, once again, that's reflected in passages from Lao Tzu. In Lao Tzu, there's a passage which says, outside everything is cycling. And the Tao moves backwards. All these metaphors and images pointing towards a circle. Which brings up the next item on our syllabus. Time in Chinese medicine. The concept, the experience of time in our modern world is time is an arrow. It's got a direction. The past is in one direction, the future is in another direction. And we're somehow riding this arrow of time. Well, this is not at all the ancient Chinese concept of time. The ancient Chinese concept of time is a circle, a cycle. How did the ancients keep track of time? They had a rope. The rope was easily formed into a circle. What did they need time for?
Crops, harvest.
They were farmers. They needed time in order to understand the coming and going of growing conditions. If you are a farmer, you must pay attention to the weather, not only to the daily weather, but to the long-term patterns of weather. You have to have some way of understanding not just what's happening today, but what's likely to happen tomorrow, next week, next month. As a farmer, you need to take actions today that you won't see the results of for many months. So in order to keep track of the patterns of emergence of heat and cold, ancient farmers developed a way of keeping track of time. What was most vital to them was the understanding of the cyclical patterns that emerged from such study of the natural world. Those were the patterns that could be used in order to manage a farm, when to plant, when to sow, when to reap, when to do whatever one was doing. Because indeed, farming is a real lesson in the fact that you don't just need to do the right thing, you need to do the right thing at the right time. If you do a correct action in the wrong sequence, those genes don't get passed on. The knowledge that perpetuates itself is the knowledge which includes a correct and accurate understanding and estimation about the patterns in the cycles of heat and cold. And heat and cold, of course, are correlated easily with light and dark. Yin-yang theory begins its existence as an account of the sunny side of a hill and the shady side of a hill. It brings us into this thought experiment of the ancients, which was to occupy a position on a hill and see that in the course of one sun cycle, one spot is now in the sun, now in the shadow. And from this simple observation flows the complicated expression of the laws of yin and yang. These are the same laws which lie at the basis of so many medical theories. And to grasp their significance and their potency, one should be able to understand their status as essentially farming implements. it's a tool that was developed to make the farm function, which means, as one sees in the text of the I Ching over and over, to harmonize with the time, to make one's own personal actions harmonize and resonate with the cycles of the natural world. This is one of the most fundamental ideas that one finds throughout the Suen. That there is a basic law of nature, and that to live in harmony with this law is to survive, and to transgress against this law is to perish.
That brings up for me the experience of like being in cities and trying to harmonize the patterns that are like out of sync.
Yeah, you know, it really illustrates where this disconnect from nature comes from. Modern people have over and over again insulated themselves and cut themselves off from these same patterns of the natural world. So, of course, the functioning of their body can't benefit from those patterns. And in large part it's because every time we walk into a dark room, we flick on the light. We remove the necessity for understanding the darkness. It's a big mistake that our modern way of life pretty much commands that we repeat. You can't have a city full of millions of people functioning all night long in the dark. It's the crisis when the power goes out.
But it also gets you find that a little bit where, because, you know, like last winter we had a lot of power outage. I know you guys had 4 days, and we were similar, and it's like a whole different thing happens with the family when you don't have that, anything from that. The light, your patterns, I feel like the food, it all kind of, it made me see how, you know, those kind of, that's what came up when you said that to me.
It becomes particularly poignant when you have a electricity-driven well.
Yes. Oh, which we do. Be outside.
You know, when I first went to China, I was teaching English, and my students wanted to know what can they do to learn English better. I said, knead it. Why did you learn Chinese? I'd ask them. And until they realized that we learn our native language because we need it. You can argue about theories of linguistics, but whatever's going on a genetic or cultural level, one of the key drivers of that dynamism of language acquisition is the necessity of getting language. You want to teach people language effectively? Put them in environments where they need it. Put someone in an environment where they need it, and within 7 days they will learn how to say, "Can I have some water?" within a month, they'll learn how to ask for food. Whether or not it's capable of learning how to ask for air in the 2 or 3 minutes it has to do that speaks to the language genius of an individual. But the fact is that that kind of necessity is one of the primary drivers of language acquisition, knowledge acquisition. So this discussion about time leads to another interesting insight into the origins and nature of what we call Jinglo theory, or the theory of the channels. On these ropes, which functioned as early calendars, when something significant happened, like the hottest day of the year, a knot would be tied. These knots came to be associated with festivals. The word for festival in Chinese is knot. Jie. What's spring festival? Chunjie. It's the spring knot. The same word was used by early writers about acupuncture to describe the structures that lie along the channels, which we now call and think of as points. They're knots. This little bit of linguistic or literal insight into the nature of Jinglo theory reveals that what we've got in the Jinglo are time regulation mechanisms. And what we're fundamentally doing with the use of these points is adjusting the timing of the body's various systems. You know what the basic meaning of Jing is? It means regulation, standard, normal. In the Chinese language, before any notion of a channel or a stream or any kind of linear propagation of anything, there lies the notion of regulation. What you're doing when you intervene using these knots or using these points is adjusting the timing of the body. And here again we have that notion that it is not enough that the body's systems simply do the right thing. They have to do the right thing at the right time. And this pattern of timing is intricately interrelated. Some of the patterns of this interrelationship are accounted for theoretically in Wuxing theory. The theory of the 5 phases tells us that one phase generates another, and one phase inhibits another. It allows us to notice when this timing has been disrupted and to take appropriate action to re-establish the regular pattern. To me, that's a useful bit of knowledge to scare out of all this discussion, because it puts the acupuncturist in a slightly different relationship with the activity of doing acupuncture. If you see it as adjusting the hands of a clock, of opening a gate to bring a flow to correlate here with another going on there. To bring the outside and the inside of the body into harmony, into regulation. You know, it's worth it to mention in this regard that we're kind of burdened by our modern time sense. Our modern time sense tells us that time is universal. In fact, the name of the modern time system is universal time. Currently, we think of time as if it's a feature of the universe, like matter, like energy, like space. Yet, all we have is the relationship between our planet and the sun, and our planet and the moon, and the ways in which these bodies interact and interrelate. there's nothing there. The modern sense of time, dates back to the beginning of the 19th century. What made it necessary for it to be the same time everywhere was the railroad. Prior to the railroad, to this day, if you go to Europe and you go to the little towns, you see at the center of all old towns and villages, there's a clock. The clock announces what time it is. It allows everybody in the town to coordinate their interaction. But it doesn't tell you what time it is at some remote place. It only tells local time. But when you're on a train that travels between remote places, to make that journey meaningful, you have to be able to adjust people's schedules. This need for adjustment brought about a new understanding of time. It was called originally British Railroad Time, BRT. BRT became GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. Greenwich Mean Time has now developed into what we call universal time. But it's the same fallacy. The only time people have is the time of their locale. That's the time that's measured by the Jing Law. And thinking back to your comment about modern people, that dependence upon the most local time is another feature that is surrendered to our modern time sense. We no longer live in the reality of the time that is organic and real to each of us. We live in this synthetic universal time. So it puts the human in a different kind of stress on the subject of time. It puts, if you will, people at odds. Their own personal timing is, from the get-go, at odds with the time in which they live. I need look no further than my own household every weekday morning, when the kids have got to get up and get out of bed early in the morning to get to school on time. This sets up a lifelong pattern of profound disorientation as a temporal being. But we do it because we have to. To learn the discipline of the modern world, you better learn its time constraints. You need to.
If you really want to be disoriented, try daylight savings time. It cuts the year, divides the year into two halves that are completely arbitrary and inorganic, whereas in the European farming and small animal crafting universe, the year was cut into two halves by May Day and Halloween. May Day being the time when you take your cows out to the high pastures, the farther pastures, because you could, right? They weren't so muddy anymore, and then around the end of October you bring them back. And so it was an organic dividing of the year into winter and summer. And ours is arbitrary and makes everybody crazy.
Especially if you consider that it might be the barbecue lobby that's doing it.
So one of the things that we're always trying to do is bring people back to some semblance of their organic personal time. We're adjusting their timing.
So there's some practitioners I've seen who are into looking at the clock and treating the person based off the clock. I'm sure there's different ways of adjusting the timing of the points. Like literal and metaphorical.
You know, there's a notion in acupuncture theory called midnight and midday ebbing and flowing. Chronoacupuncture. Some people practice this almost fetishistically, you know, with a clock in one hand and some kind of chart and opening points and closing points. At another level, there's a simple recognition that what one is confronting when one looks at the patient is an integral, potentially whole system that needs its own internal regulations adjusted. Personally, I could never follow those kinds of Zhu chronoacupuncture charts just because they're too laborious. Yet I have no problem admitting and accepting this broader understanding that what we're doing is dealing with temporal regulation. A very common feature of cases in the clinic is some kind of sleep disturbance. No matter what the presenting symptoms are, no matter what the condition, no matter what the diagnosis, it's very, very common that people have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. And I always point out to people that, well, if you want to be well regulated, you need to regulate yourself. And what the sleeping-waking cycle is really all about is light and dark. That during the course of a year, Now there will be more light. Now there will be less light. Very generally speaking, when it's light, you should be up and active. This is naturally what happens. When the sun comes up in the morning, activity returns. You hear the birds, you see the plants, you feel the wind. This is the stirring of the young. Activity rises with the light, and as the light begins to diminish, activity wanes. When it's dark, you should lie down and rest. Of course, in the summer, you're going to be up more and down less because there's more light. And in the winter, you'll be quiet and up less. So, one piece of, I guess we might call it lifestyle advice, which I find myself often giving to patients, is in order to regulate your sleeping cycle, arrange your life so that shortly after dark you lie down, and that shortly after the light returns in the morning you get up. And I will point out to people, even if you have to be up at night in the dark, take a break. Lie down with the coming of the dark, even if it's just to take a rest. And even if you're going back to sleep, arise when the light returns. Use the coming and going of light, in other words, to spark and maintain a regular pulse in your life. And by the way, on counseling people about sleep difficulties, one of the most important things I always include in this advice is don't fret about not sleeping. If it's sleep time and you're awake, be awake. But don't abandon the need to regulate your movement so that shortly after dark you lie down, and that shortly after light you get up. And on implementation of such a strategy, I tell people be very forgiving. If you don't do it one day, it doesn't mean you've failed. Do it the next day. If you only do it once a week, the next week do it twice. As in, with people who lose and gain weight, the problem is not how to manipulate your body into this state or that state. It's how to maintain it in an ideal state over a long period of time. It doesn't do any good if you're 30 pounds overweight to lose 30 pounds in 2 months. If 2 months after that, you're back to being 30 pounds overweight. But if you're 30 pounds overweight and you lose 2 pounds in a year and 3 pounds the next year and 5 pounds, over a period of several years, if you sustainably amend your dimensions, then that can have meaning and value.
Yeah, that seems like the difficult part of creating sustainable change is the small changes that end up over time.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I stress the importance of understanding time is that it is this unnatural relationship with universal time that lies at the heart of a lot of problems people have with regulating their bodies. What they use to regulate it to is unnaturally regular. And often it takes a little genius in order to find a way that's just a little better.
So then there's an aspect of change where you make these healthy changes and you notice how much better your life is when you make these changes. And you reach a certain point and then it's like you revert back. You're like,
You know,
or you fall out of practice, you stop meditating for a couple months and you start picking it up again. Get back on the horse.
I like to point out that the only problem with American healthcare is nobody's healthy and nobody cares. Other than that, everything's just fine. We've developed a cultural orientation to health where, like everything else in our lives, we view it as a commodity. We view it as something that we go to professionals and purchase. We purchase it with elaborate third-party payment schemes and so on, but this flies in the face of the fact that health is not a product. Health is not a service. Health is the result of your behavior. Of course, it's the result of your genetic endowment as well, but once you are genetically endowed, that deed is done. Now all you've got that you can influence is behavior. And to get someone on the path of well-being, they need to get into the driver's seat where they understand that they are running their body. They are controlling those things that can be controlled. And, you know, for long-term patients, and you see many of them here in the clinic, a lot of the people, I don't know what percentage, but probably 75% are continuing patients. And what we're constantly working with them is the establishment of manageable and sustainable patterns of well-being.
It is 2:15. Speaking of time.
Okay, well, we pretty much covered what's on day one. If you don't have it, we have a PDF of this whole text. One of the things that's going on, this is about the fourth or maybe fifth time now that we've offered this course as a running cycle. And as a result of the earlier ones and this current one, we've got this text. One of the aims of this text is to take what has been in years past part of the lecture and reduce it to printed text so that I don't know why.
So that when the giant world
Accessibility?
computer
People
crashes,
can
we'll
read
still
it.
have something.
Anyway, send me an email. I'll send you a PDF of
I
this.
I got his email. I was gonna just get everybody's
Okay,
information. as
Mackenzie
part
will
of
get
the
it to you.
registration process. College. So, did you get the books?
I may have. I don't have possession of them.
Okay.
They may have come to the house. I think this morning as I was kind of rushing out of the house, I saw a pack.